Welcome, come on in. It's wonderful to have you here for our event tonight, The Power of Story in Healing. You will be feasting your eyes on this really beautiful visual as you come in. And I'm going to ask actually one of our speakers this evening, Robert Vetter, to just give us a quick little caption to what we're looking at.
Sure. So we're looking at an elder who's sitting with the children, and elders traditionally were and still are the teachers because they have a lifetime of experience to describe their own lives and the traditional stories of their people that embody their values, their understanding of who we are in the world, how we should behave, what are the connections between us and the powers that surround us. How are we related to the animals and the natural world? All of the things that would make up a complete education can be told and taught through the stories. And here we have this lovely elder sitting with the children who are conjuring up images in their mind's eye because since they didn't have computer screens and televisions, it was the screen of the mind that conjured up all of these images. So we welcome everybody to come and share in some of these beautiful stories.
That's beautiful, Bob. Thank you. Thank you. I think we've got most of the people in the waiting room in. So maybe we can stop the screen share and we'll get started. If you've just joined us, don't worry, you haven't missed anything. We just wanted to start the evening tonight with that beautiful visual. I'm going to take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Ling Lo. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am Hollyhock's program director and very delighted to be your host today for this evening where I am. My colleague Eitan is also here for tech support, so if you're having any connection issues, please feel free to hit up either of us. I'm joining today from the traditional, ancestral, and occupied territories of the Coast Salish people, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations, commonly known as Vancouver. We do territory acknowledgements as settlers on this land to honor the Indigenous people who have stewarded this land and passed it through many generations for thousands of years, and to acknowledge the fact that many of the lands that we occupy now have been stolen in this country from the First Nations. I have personally found myself thinking a lot about the power of place during this pandemic, and today I'm really looking forward to connecting more about the power of place and story. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, include the traditional territories that you may be calling in from, native-land.ca. Thank you, Eitan, just dropped it in the chat. This is a great resource to look up whose land you're on, as well as why and how we do territory acknowledgements. So how many people here, we've got a couple pages. How many people have been to a Hollyhock program before? Either virtual or what we call IRL in real life? Just like a little show of hands or a little wave. We've got a few waving. Well, thank you for coming and supporting us, and thank you for joining us if this is your first time. Hollyhock is a not-for-profit that creates meaningful experiences for personal growth and social transformation. That means we bring together the inner skills of wellness and personal development with the outer impact of social and environmental leadership. We offer over 100 programs every year on beautiful Cortes Island campus, which is on the land of the Klahoose, Homoko, and Kla'amin First Nations in Vancouver and online. Our vision is to achieve a future where people live in right relations with ourselves, each other, and nature, understanding that these are all intricately connected. So without further ado, I'm very excited to be introducing our presenters and speakers for this event. Dr. Lewis Mehl-Madrona graduated from Stanford University School of Medicine and trained in family medicine, psychiatry, and clinical psychology. He was first introduced to us at Hollyhock by Dr. Gabor Mate, who many of you will also know for a joint program we are planning once we are able to gather in person again. Lewis works with Aboriginal communities to develop uniquely Aboriginal styles of healing and healthcare for use in those communities. He is the author of Coyote Medicine, Coyote Healing, and Coyote Wisdom, a trilogy of books on what Native culture has to offer the modern world. He has also written several books on narrative medicine, healing the mind through the power of story, and has recently co-authored a book with Barbara Mingai.
Here's
So
Barbara.
I see Pete peeking in the screen beside him. Thank you for joining us tonight, Barbara. I'd also like to introduce Robert Vedder, or Bob, who is a cultural anthropologist and educator for audiences that range from young children through adulthood, including colleges. His teaching focuses on two areas: the intersection of spirituality and healing, as well as the historic mistreatment of Native American peoples with an eye towards social justice. Bob was invited to co-author the book Big Bow, the spiritual life and teachings of a Kiowa family with adopted Kiowa uncle, medicine man Richard Tartza. So we are in very good hands for this conversation this evening on using traditional stories and narrative healing arts. And we are very honored to have you both join us this evening. Lewis and Bob, over to you.
Thank you. I think we want to begin with a song, and we also want to acknowledge that we sit on the traditional land of the Wabanaki Confederacy, the tribes with whom we work here in Maine, the Penobscot, the Passamaquoddy, the Mi'kmaq, and the Maliseet. So we'd like to sing a song honoring the trees, because we just tapped our maple tree tonight because it's finally above freezing. so we're going to sing a tree song. Way, ah, way, oh, hey. Way, hey, way, oh, hey. Way, hey, way, hey, way, oh, hey. Tunkashila wamayan kayo, hey. Le mie cha nawajielo, hey. Wamayan kayo, le mie cha nawajielo, hey. Way, way, oh, hey. Way, way, oh, hey. Way, 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 oh, hey. Tunkashila wamayan kayo, hey. Le mie cha nawajielo, hey. Wamayan kayo, le mie cha nawajielo, hey. Omitakiasi. So we honor the tree with that song. So we wanted to briefly, because we both talk too much, let us introduce ourselves. So I invite Bob to say a few more words about where he comes from in this enterprise that we're doing.
Sure. So thank you, Lewis. My name is Bob Vedder. I'm on lands that were originally occupied by the Montaukett people who were displaced from here, an Algonquian-speaking people. I'm on eastern Long Island at the moment. And I'd like to start with an introduction. I should also tell you my ceremonial name is Wabenanoma, which is in the Cheyenne language, and it means white thunder. So I'd like to start with a story about how I got to be around all these stories. So I grew up on Long Island. I went to college upstate New York, and I went to graduate school in Oklahoma, which I knew nothing about when I arrived there. I got there, and for reasons that are too complicated to explain right now, I had to immediately start doing ethnographic field work, and my area of interest was spirituality and healing. So I wanted to meet a medicine man. I met with my advisor, who I hoped was going to introduce me to somebody, who just told me that I was going to have to use a networking approach and just meet people until I eventually found a medicine man. I was very discouraged. I got back to my apartment and I told my roommate, a guy named Jim, about what had happened to me. And he said, "Oh, well, maybe I can help you." And I said, "Well, I don't see how you're going to help me." And he said, "Well, I'm a quarter Comanche. And the next time my family has a gathering, I could bring you along as a guest." So the next week, his family had a gathering in a park just outside of a city called Lawton in the southwestern part of the state. I got there with Jim, and as is typical in Native gatherings, all the women were in one area putting the meal together, and all the men were sitting in folding chairs under a shade tree. So I got there and I was introduced by Jim. And I said, in my usual direct New York manner, I said, "Hi, my name is Bob Vetter, and I'm an anthropology student, and I'm trying to meet a medicine man." And all of a sudden, all you could hear was nothing. It was like crickets. And I didn't realize at the time that this was my first of many, many faux pas. I can honestly tell people what not to do in Indian country because I've bungled my way through so many things over the years. At any rate, everybody was quiet. Nobody said a thing. And finally, fortunately, the meal was ready. We started to eat. An old man came up to me after the meal was over and kind of whispered in my ear. And he said, "I heard what you said about wanting to meet a medicine man." And he said, "As far as I know, in our Comanche tribe, we still have one medicine man left. And I don't know his name and I don't know where he lives, but I could tell you where there's another old man who I think might be able to lead you to him." So he drew a diagram, he drew a map on a napkin and handed it to me. He said, "The guy doesn't have a phone, but you could just show up." So the next week, Jim and I got in the car and we drove, and it should have been an hour and a half drive, but it was probably more like a 3-hour drive because we were totally lost. We finally get to the house, little white house in the middle of an open field. We get out of the car. Now, I was driving and Jim was accompanying me, and I was thinking to myself, I'm really glad that Jim is with me because he's Comanche and he's going to know what to say. So we got up to the door, knocked on the door. This old man, kind of short and squat with long hair and gray braids, comes to the door and he opens the door and he looks at us. Now, I'm waiting for Jim to say something. And apparently, Jim was waiting for me to say something. And the three of us were just standing there looking at each other. And I figured somebody's got to say something. So I just said the first thing that came to my mind again. And it was, "Hi, my name is Bob Vetter, and I'm a graduate student in anthropology. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the Comanches." Again, absolute silence. And he looked at me and he said, "This is how you come to my house?" Now, I didn't know what he was getting at, so I said, "Yeah." And he said, "This is how you come to my house to see me?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Come in here a minute." He invited us into his house, but this was not a friendly invitation. He pointed to the couch and he said, "Sit down over there." Jim and I sat down and we kind of looked at each other. He stormed out of the room. He went into a back room, came back a moment later, and he had a painting in his hands. And he held this painting up in front of me. And I said, "Wow, that's beautiful." It was a Comanche war dancer painting. But he clearly was not interested in what I had to say about his artwork. What he said was, "I'm an artist and I have better things to do than to sit around talking to you." And another thing he said, "That's no way to visit an Indian." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, the least thing you could do if you visit an Indian is bring him something to eat." So now I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I just got up off the couch and I said, "I'm really sorry." Jim and I got in the car and we drove all the way back to Norman where we lived, kind of in silence. And I mentioned something about going back the next week, and he said, "You're going to go back to that guy's house?" And I said, "Sure." And he goes, "I wouldn't go back to that guy's house if you paid me." And he had some other things to say about Woodgie, the old man. Next week came, I was an absolutely destitute graduate student, and I bought what I could in the way of a pathetic paper bag of a few groceries. Got to the door by myself this time. I knocked on the door. The same old man came to the door, looked at me, looked at the paper bag, and he got a big smile on his face. And he said, "Now that's the way you visit an Indian." And he held his hand out and he shook my hand. And I like to say that my personal journey began that day, because Woodgie welcomed me into his home. He eventually became my uncle. His wife was the niece of a famous Comanche medicine woman named Sanapia. And I began learning about Comanche medicine from the two of them. Eventually, Woodgie would go on to introduce me to Oliver Patapony, who was the last medicine man of the Comanches, who eventually adopted me and made me his grandson. And I would like to say that my own personal healing and my own personal journey began with that day. Over the course of the years, I got to know my grandpa Chief. That's how we referred to him. People called him Chief Patapony. He introduced me to this world through stories. And whenever I went to his house, I would ask him about the healings that he had done. He would tell me about the doctoring ways of the people that he knew when he was a child. So he was born, they don't even know when, maybe late 1800s or around 1900. And when he was talking about the healers that he knew when he was a boy, we're talking way back into the 1800s. So he would fill me with these stories. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that I found out that through his daughter, that he gave me the name in Comanche storyteller. Not because I ever told a story, but I was there to listen to stories. And I like to think that he gave me some big shoes to fill, to become a storyteller, to be able to share some of these things that have been so meaningful for me in healing me, that I'd like to share them with other people. So with that, I say thank you. I pass it off to Lewis.
Great, thank you. So a little bit about me, and I also want to introduce Barbara, who sang with me, and we're married. So I grew up in southeastern Kentucky in a Cherokee family, and my grandmother was a storyteller. My great-grandmother was a healer. And later in life, I discovered that my Cherokee father wasn't really my father, and my real father was Lakota. And so I have pursued both Cherokee wisdom and Lakota wisdom in the course of my life. And it's been a tremendously important spirituality for me. The Lakota spirituality of my father, especially. And so tonight, we want to share some of that with you, share some stories. And do you want to say hello, Barb?
I am here to.
Are you in the, lean over so you're in the.
A microphone. There we go. I'm here because I have a piece of the story that I was asked to share in the context of what they're doing. And I am a healthcare worker. I'm a clinical social worker, and I work with the Wabanaki Confederacy. And my clients are all Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, and I have been using ideas of narrative work for a long time, and use it particularly as part of my healing toolkit in terms of working with people and their mental health needs. So that's me.
Right. So we work with the Wabanaki people. And let's see, oh my. That's weird. So yes, we work with the Wabanaki people. And so I think we're probably ready for a story, Bob. What do you think?
I think I'd be happy to share a story with you. I'm going to make reference to the deerskin painting that's behind me, and I'll change the lighting a little bit. There we go. Okay, that'll light this up a little bit better. I'll start by telling the story, and then I'll reference the deerskin painting that's behind me. And it's a story, I'm going to share a Haudenosaunee story with you, the people also known as the Iroquois, the people of the Longhouse. Haudenosaunee is often the preferred term these days. And the story that I'm going to share you is one that I often share with children. I do a lot of work with kids and use the stories in a way that expresses values and also an understanding of the way that things came to be. This particular story that I'm going to share with you tells where their knowledge of medicine plants came from. But then I'll be talking about the way that we might utilize this therapeutically that has absolutely nothing to do with that level of understanding the story. But we'll unpack it a little bit at the end. So this story goes back to a time before the Haudenosaunee people knew anything about medicine, back to a time when if you or a family member got sick, it was scary because you had no hospital, no doctor, no medicine man, nobody to go to. You had to just hope that you'd get better on your own. Well, one day, the people were in their scattered longhouse villages all over what we now know as upstate New York and the southern part of Canada. And in the middle of the day, in a day that had plenty of bright daylight, there was a light in the sky that was so bright that it caught everyone's attention. And when they looked up, they saw this enormous ball of fire shoot across the sky and crash on the ground. Only nobody knew where the ball of fire landed. But right about that time, they say that a mysterious old man who no one had ever seen before arrived on the scene. And he started making his way from village to village. Well, he got to the first village, and there were some people outside who were doing their outdoor jobs and chores, and they got one look at the old man, and they yelled out, "Get out of here, old man. We don't want somebody like you around." Now, the old man was old and decrepit. He was wearing dirty and torn deerskin clothing. He was dirty. According to some of the accounts, they say that he might have smelled a little bit, and he kind of reminds me of what we would consider a homeless person. Well, when he heard the people say that, he didn't say a word back to them. He just kind of looked down like this, and with that hunched over appearance, he just kind of shuffled his way out of that village and went to the next village. And when he got to the next clan village, he was treated the same way. People who were doing their chores saw him approaching, and they yelled out, "Keep walking. We don't want somebody like you around." And again, he looked down and shuffled his way out of that village. And the same thing happened as he tried to visit village after village after village. Well, on his journey, he was at one of these other clan villages, and he was starting to make his way towards the doorway because by then it was late and everybody was already inside the longhouse. Only before he got to the door of the longhouse, it opened. And on the inside, there was a woman who had been using a broom to sweep up dirt, and the dirt was in a pile. So she opened the door flap up, took one look at the old man, took that broom and chased after him and started beating him with the broom. Well, he hobbled away as quickly as he could to try to get away from her, and by now he had been to every single longhouse village except for one. And he kind of thought to himself, why should I even go to that last village? If everywhere I go, everybody is this mean to me, what's the point in even going there? But at the last minute, they said that he would finally go to that one village after all. And when he got to that village, again, the Bear Clan village, everybody was already inside the longhouse. So again, he started making his way towards the door. And again, before he got to the door opened. Only this time, it was an old lady who poked her head out that open doorway. She yelled out, "Hey, old man," like that. Now he thought back to what had happened to him at that last longhouse village, and he thought someone is about to do something mean to him again. So he started shuffling away as quickly as he could again. She saw the old man leaving and she yelled out, "Wait a minute, old man." She said, "Please come back, come into our longhouse." So the old man entered. She said, "Please have a seat." He sat down. She looked at him and she said, "It looks to me like it's been a long time since somebody made you a nice hot meal to eat. So I'm going to fix you something to eat." Well, she started putting this meal together for him. But then she looked at him again and she said, "You know what, though?" She said, "You look tired. I bet you could use some rest." So she led the old man to the back part of the longhouse where the sleeping platforms were. And she said, "Why don't you take a nap here?" She laid out some skins and furs for him to make comfortable bedding. And then next to that, she laid out a fresh set of deerskin clothing. And she said, "When you wake up, you can put on this clothing and then come on in and eat the meal that I'll have ready for you." So the old man took a nap, woke up, changed clothes, went in and ate the meal. The day wore on and eventually it got to be nighttime and it got to be bedtime. And the old lady took the old man aside and she said to him, "I just want you to know that from now on, you will always have a home to live in. Because from today on, this longhouse will not only be our home, but it'll be your home as well." And then she pointed to the spot where the old man had taken his nap. And she said, "Right there is where you'll be able to lay your head down to rest every night." Well, that night, everybody slept. And in the morning, they woke up and gathered in another part of the longhouse where they sat to eat breakfast. And while they were eating breakfast, all of a sudden, the old lady got to thinking about that old man. She looked around and looked around and looked around, and she didn't see him anywhere. So she went back to check on him back in the sleeping area. And when she got there he was still under the covers. She said, "Good morning." She said, "How are you?" He said, "I'm not feeling well." And she said, "Well, what's wrong?" And he started to list off a whole series of physical symptoms that he had. He talked about what his illness was and what these symptoms were. And she said, "That's awful." She said, "Is there anything that I can do for you?" And he said, "As a matter of fact, there is." He said, "You may not know this, but for every sickness that a human being can have, there's a plant that can cure it if you know what it is and you know how to use it." So he told her where the plant was growing that she could use. He also told her that you never pick the first plant that you find, because if that's the only one, you'll end up wiping it out from the area. He said you don't pick the second plant because there could be somebody who needs it more than you do. But once you find the third plant, you can pick, but not until you leave an offering. You leave a tobacco offering as a way of expressing your respect, offering something up because you don't get something for nothing in this world. He told her how to pick that plant, how to bring it back, how to pound it up and make it into a medicine preparation. So she brought the medicine to him. He took it and he felt better. Well, the next morning, the same thing happened. She didn't see him at breakfast. She went to check on him. And again, there he was under the covers. She said, "Good morning." She said, "How are you?" He said, "I'm not feeling very well." She said, "What's wrong?" And he explained a different sickness, a different set of symptoms, and told her where a different plant was growing. Well, she went and she picked it, made the medicine preparation, brought it to him, and sure enough, he felt better. The next day, he had a different sickness and told her about a different plant. The day after that, it was something else. The day after that, it was something else. And this continued in the same way for days and weeks and months. Until finally, one day when the old lady went in to check on him. She said, "Good morning." She said, "How are you?" He said, "I'm fine. In fact," he said, "I have something to tell you." He said, "I'm not that old man that you thought I was at all. I'm actually Sangwaya Disu, the creator." And I purposely put myself into the body of this old man in order to find out who, if anyone, among the Haudenosaunee people is still following my original instructions. And he said, of all of the Longhouse villages that I've been to, you and the other Bear Clan people are the only ones who remembered to treat me with kindness and respect. That's the reason why I gave you the gift that I gave you. He said, the gift is the knowledge of medicine. So from now on, you and your people, the Bear Clan people, will know everything that there is to know about healing any kind of sickness. That means that in the future, when members of any of those other clans get sick, they'll have to travel all the way here to the Bear Clan Bear Clan nation in order to find a healer who can make them well. With that, they say that in a split second, that old man turned into a very handsome young man with long black hair. Then there was a moment of a flash of white light that filled the entire inside of the longhouse as a ball of fire shot from the ground up to the sky. And that's when Sangwayadisu made his way back up to the sky world, where he remains even to this day. And even today, hundreds and hundreds of years later, today it's still the Bear Clan people who keep this knowledge of medicine alive. Now, I was lucky enough to learn some of this Haudenosaunee medicine from two Mohawk elders who are members of that Bear Clan. So this is still alive today in their teachings and in their very sophisticated knowledge of herbal or plant medicine. Now, that story that I just told you can be retold in the pictures that we have here. Storytelling skins like this could be used as mnemonic devices, a way to help you to remember. If you forgot where you were in a story, you could look at the pictures here and it would bring you back. Now, we don't read it left to right, top to bottom, the way that we would read a book today. Instead, we start here and we make our way around this way. So each of these buildings that you see here is a longhouse, and the animals that we have here are the various clan animals of the Haudenosaunee. So we have heron, eel, deer, beaver, wolf, hawk, snipe, turtle. And the dotted line indicates this journey that the old man is on, going from village to village to village, until finally he ends up here at the village of the Bear Clan people, where for the first time he's treated with kindness and respect. The old lady gives him food. That's why we see his food bowl. She gives him clothing made out of deer skin that we see here. But the next day, the old man wakes up sick, which is indicated by the reclining position that we see him in here. He sends her out day after day to pick a variety of plant sources that she learns to make into the medicines that she gives to him day after day, until one day he reveals himself to her as the creator, Sangwayadisu. Then he goes back up to the sky world and leaves the knowledge of medicine behind with the Bear Clan people who keep it alive even today. So that's a story that we can, let me just end it by saying that story tells about the origins of Haudenosaunee medicine. I first heard the story from a dear friend of mine, Tom Porter, who is a Mohawk elder. He's a spiritual leader of the Bear Clan people. This story can be read and understood on a number of levels. So one is that it simply tells us, how did they get their knowledge of medicine? Another level is connected to their understanding of what are called the original instructions. And the three original instructions are: always be grateful for what you have in your life, always treat others with kindness and respect, and finally, honor the clan system. They had and still have a matrilineal clan system that keeps everybody connected in a web of relationship. Therapeutically, though, there are three distinct ways that I've come up with that we can use this story. We could use this story for someone, for example, a young adult who is left out of any kind of a peer group, someone who feels that they don't belong, they don't have a place to fit in. The story could also be used for someone who has been abused, a person who has been in abusive relationships. And finally, a person who is racked by shame, because often the people who are victimized end up embodying some of these ideas. I must not be good enough. In the story, we find that it's not you. You're not at fault. Some people simply forget their original instructions. And so those are three examples of ways that we would use it. And what's important to understand is we don't necessarily want a one-to-one correlation between the story and the particular thing that we're working on, the therapeutic issue. You don't want something that is so completely obvious that the person in the story did exactly what was done. But we want a story that will have a message that will somehow make an impact on the other than conscious mind. And obviously, we're going to talk a lot more about that in our course that we have coming up. But that'll end my story for today. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bob. So for my part of the program, I wanted to tell at least two Iktomi stories. So Iktomi means Spider-Man. And in Lakota cosmology, Iktomi had terrible parentage. So he was sort of doomed from the outset. But, too bad for him. And so he is a very well-dressed spider. He wears buckskin leggings on all of his 8 legs. He paints his face red and black. He is quite a dapper character. And Iktomi stories, I think, are terribly relevant to our time today because Iktomi is against anything that's good for the people. Whatever the good spirits want, Iktomi opposes. And however, Iktomi's only power is trickery. He has a silk tongue. He can shapeshift, but he cannot make you do anything. If you listen to him, you act on your own free will. So I want to tell you one of the most famous Lakota Iktomi stories, which is Iktomi and the Ducks. So Iktomi woke up one morning, and he lives by himself because nobody can stand him. Nobody can countenance being around him because he's such a nasty guy. So he lives alone. He woke up by himself and he was hungry. Now, Iktomi would rather eat through trickery than through honest hunting. And so he said, how am I going to get some food? And he came out of his living place, his dwelling place, and he looked around and he saw a flock of ducks flying overhead. And he said to himself, they're low to the ground. They're going to land somewhere. If I follow them, maybe I can eat some duck. Because duck is really good to eat, as all of you know. So Iktomi thought, well, how am I going to attract those ducks? And he came up with a plan. And so he created a kind of backpack, a sakado, and he filled it with straw and other kinds of branches and things like that. Made it really big, and he put it on his back, and he began to carry it in the direction that he saw the ducks going. And he walked and he walked and he walked and he walked. And then he walked some more. And he walked and he walked and he walked and he walked. And then he walked even more. And he walked and he walked and he walked. And finally, he saw a little lake, more than a pond, less than a lake, where the ducks had landed. And they were swimming around in the middle. And if you're watching, you see our new kitten, Princess Blueberry. And he carried his burden very heavily, so heavily that one of the ducks said, "Hey, you, what do you have in there?" And he looked at the duck and he said, "I've got some songs." And the duck said, "Really? I'd like to hear those songs." And Iktomi said, "No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't want to hear those songs. I wouldn't want to open up this bundle and share those songs with you." And the duck started begging him. And other ducks came around. And when they heard what was going on, they started begging him too. And he kept insisting, "No, no, I can't share my songs with you." And they kept saying, "Please, please, let us hear the songs." And Iktomi said, "All right, finally, maybe I'll let you hear the songs. But I don't sing the songs in the open. I'm going to have to build a structure in which to sing these songs because they cannot be sung in the open. And the duck said, "Okay." And so Iktomi grabbed some willow from the nearby the pond, and he stretched it across and he built a dome. And he took some of the grass and the branches from his backpack, from his sack, and he spread it around, and he got some more until it was completely covered. And there was only one door, a very small door. And he said, "All right, you ducks, if you want to hear the songs, you have to go inside the door and wait for me, and I will come in." So the ducks dutifully entered the lodge, and they circled around, waiting for Iktomi to come in. And finally, Iktomi came in, and he began to sing a song. And the song was about how if you really want to feel the power of this song, you must close your eyes. And if you open your eyes, they'll turn red forever. And the duck said, "Iktomi, we want to hear the full power of these songs." And Iktomi said, "Well, then you're going to need to dance too." And they said, "Iktomi, we will dance." And Iktomi said, "Well, let me show you how to dance." And he showed them a slow circle dance around the lodge. And he said, "You must do this, and you must do it with your eyes closed while I sing." "All right," said the ducks. So Iktomi began to sing, and he sang his songs, and the ducks circled around. And slowly but surely, Iktomi did what he came to do. And what was that? No one knew. But one of the ducks opened its eyes, and the duck saw that Iktomi had been twisting the necks of ducks all over the place, and he had a whole pile of dead ducks. And this duck called out, "Run, ducks, run! Iktomi has tricked us. He's killing us. He's planning to eat us. Get out of here." And all the ducks woke up from their trance, and they ran out the front door, leaving Iktomi with his pile of ducks. which was quite a feat for Iktomi. And so, well now, don't listen to Iktomi. So I want to tell you another story about Iktomi. And so in this story, Iktomi was camped out in the plains because, as I told you earlier, he doesn't get along with anyone. No one likes him. You know, he's a no goodnik. And so he was camped out in the plains. And he was cold. And he was hungry. Iktomi is always hungry because he won't honestly hunt for food. He's always trying to trick people into giving him food. And by the way, there's another story about what happened to those ducks because Iktomi didn't get to eat them. And if we have time, I'll tell you what happened to those ducks. But that's another story. But I want to tell you this story about Iktomi and his blanket because Iktomi was really hungry. He was almost starving. And he looked around where he was. And, well, it was a beautiful prairie. And he saw a huge rock up a hill. And he thought, that is a grandfather rock. That is a true Ia, a true grandfather rock. And I'm going to go up and pray on that rock. Because if I go up and pray on that rock, surely something good will come of it. And I want food. I'm going to go up there and pray for some deer. Because I've got a hankering for some deer. Who doesn't? Deer is tasty. So Iktomi, he took his blanket because that was pretty much all he had. And he went up there to that rock. And it was a magic rock. It was a powerful rock. And anyone who got near that rock could feel its power. So Iktomi addressed the rock in a proper way. And he said, hey, it's me, Iktomi. And I'm really hungry. And I'd really like to offer you my blanket, for some deer meat. If you would be so kind as to get me some deer meat, I'll put this blanket on top of you and it'll be yours, And Iktomi, he just kept praying and praying and praying and in that way, of a supplicant. And pretty soon, he felt that the rock had heard him. And he put his blanket on top of the rock and he walked away and he began to follow a path toward the creek. And when he got close to the creek, what did he find but a dead deer, already warm? A warm dead deer just died. And he said, oh my, this will be so tasty. I am so happy. So, and it was heavy. It took all of his might to pull that deer back to his camp. He had to, because, spider legs are small. They're not very strong. He really had to struggle to get that deer back to his camp. And by the time he got that deer back to his camp, it was dark. And it had turned very cold. Oh, he was so cold because he didn't have that there blanket anymore. He'd given it away. And he was so cold. He said, that rock don't need no blanket. That rock don't care if it's cold. I'm going to go get my blanket back. I'm going to take it back from that rock. And so Iktomi, he marched over to that rock by the light of the moon. And he went right up to that rock and he said, hey, you rock. He said, I need my blanket more than you. I'm taking it back. So he grabbed his blanket and wrapped it around him and he felt a little warmer. And he proceeded to walk back toward his camp. And when he got back there was no deer. He said, what happened to that deer? And he looked around, and in the shadows, there was an old dead deer carcass with wasting away bones, bleached by the sun. Long ago was there any meat on that deer? And Iktomi said, what happened to my deer? What happened to my deer? And there was a little red bird up in the trees at Kalasa. And the bird said, Iktomi, you went back on your promise, and Ia took away your deer. Ia taught you a lesson, Iktomi. Don't take back what you give away, or bad things will come your way. And that was what happened to Iktomi. And so, one last story. You might wonder what happened to all those ducks. Well, I want to tell you, and then it'll be enough time for me to tell stories because there's other things to do today. Well, like Tommy, he stuffed all those ducks in his backpack, in his sac of dough, and he struggled so hard because his legs are really tiny, even though he's got 8 of them. And even though they're dressed really nicely in buckskin fringe and all of that, fancy clothing, boy, he did struggle to get those ducks back to his lodge. And when he got them back to the lodge, he said, I'm going to cook up those ducks. I'm going to really roast them good, And so he went out and looked for a long stick to make a spit, and he got everything ready to roast those ducks. And what should happen? But Coyote should appear. And Coyote said, hey, Iktomi, what you doing? And Iktomi said, I'm cooking up some ducks. And Coyote said, can I help you? And Iktomi said, no, I don't need no help, especially not from no coyote. Go away. And Coyote said, hey, he said, I'll challenge you to a game of chance for those ducks. Iktomi said, no way. And Coyote said, oh, Iktomi, I know your weakness. I know you love to gamble. You love to gamble. And I'm going to make you a wager that you can't resist. And Iktomi looked at him, and he looked at the ducks, and he said, what? That was his mistake. And Coyote said, you know that pond nearby? Tommy said, yeah, I know that pond. Of course I know that pond. That's where I got the ducks, stupid. And Coyote said, whomever can run around that pond and grab one of those pussy willows and get back here before the other one gets all the ducks. And Iktomi thought about that. Because when Iktomi thinks about things, it's about how to cheat. And he said, well, now, let's see. I know a shortcut to that pond. I'll bet Coyote, he doesn't know that shortcut. And now what am I going to get out of this that I really want? And so Iktomi said, well, Coyote, he said, I'll take you up on your bet, but if I win, you're going to have to hunt ducks for me for the next period of time, for the next many days, for the next many months, for a long time. And Coyote said, all right then, I will do that for you. And Iktomi liked that plan. And he thought, well, let's see. I know the shortcut to the pond, and I have 8 legs, so I can run really fast. And Coyote, well, he always gets distracted by something. He's fast, but he's, kind of easily distracted. And maybe I can get one of my friends, to distract him, to come up with something that would be so attractive that even Coyote would have to stop. And so Iktomi thought, well, that's a good plan. So he said to Coyote, all right then, I'll race you. I'm in. And Coyote said, fabulous. So they went to the starting line. And off they went, lickety split, going as fast as they could go. But little did Iktomi know that Coyote had relatives. And he had put two relatives along the path. So Coyote didn't have to race. He just signaled to his relatives to jump up and start running. And before you knew it, Coyote had returned back to where the ducks were and had grabbed all those ducks and ran off with them. And when Iktomi got back, there was no Coyote and no ducks. Nothing. And Iktomi was very sad. But he got them in a bad way anyway, through trickery, not through honest hunting. So what should he expect but that they would be taken from him as they were? So that's the end of my stories. And I just want to bring on Barbara to talk a little bit about the therapeutic use of an Iktomi story with one of her clients.
Here we go. Okay, I was just going to talk about, so the other day I had a client who had experienced some dreams and some waking dreams where she felt incredibly frightened of a very terrible force of what she designated as evil. And she had become very afraid that by thinking about it, she was bringing it into the world by thinking about evil. And she didn't know how to begin to address it. And she has some knowledge of Lakota stories and Lakota culture. And I was thinking about Iktomi, and one of the features of Iktomi is that he's an embodiment of evil. But one of the interesting pieces in Lakota culture is that, for example, in ceremony, Iktomi is not excluded. So we don't keep evil away. We don't push it away. We don't drive it out. It's included at the ceremony. It's a kind of, you keep your friends close and your enemies closer type approach. So one of the other things about the idea of Iktomi is that instead of a force of just kind of horribleness that's kind of omnipresent and omnipotent and has these features of just being this overwhelming force, he's mean and he's tricky. But if you are conscious and paying attention, you can avoid falling for his traps. And the idea is that you need to maintain your awareness, maintain your consciousness and your attention so you don't avoid the traps. And it was really interesting to see how being able to kind of look at this more pragmatic understanding of something that was an oppositional force or that was evil allowed her to work less with that idea of this overwhelming force that was bringing in, and have more control over forces of disappointment and trouble like Iktomi. And so I think that's really important to bring in as a sense of agency, that if I'm faced with something that feels overwhelming, if I look at it closely and I can break it down, I can look at what it's really made of and what it's really trying to do, and I can take action, and that action will work. So in the case of Iktomi, the action of understanding what Iktomi really is, that he's tricky, but he's not omnipotent, that he's not unbeatable, also helps us to be able to engage with these forces with less fear, and then be able to rouse ourselves to action, which I think is, again, an important feature of life today in the environmental position we find ourselves in, that it's important to remember that if we take action, we can move past some of those the things, the forces are trying to bring in. So that was just a use of Iktomi, and just this idea that Iktomi comes to the table, Coyote comes to the table. Neither of them are banished from feasts. They're not banished from the tribe. They're considered to be part of the makeup of the tribe and part of the emotional environment, and that we have to get to know them and get to work with them. That's all.
Great, thank you. So let's see. The host has to unmute me. I need the host. Okay. Sorry. Yes, so we think Iktomi is a really important character for the modern world, because there's a lot of trickery around these days. And the important thing that Iktomi teaches us is that his only power is to deceive us and to trick us into doing wrong. But he can't make us do wrong. He can only trick us. And so we have to bring ourselves to the position of holding a vision of what is right, of doing right, of living right, and of not being tricked, and of opening our eyes to the seduction of Iktomi. And so that seems so relevant today in our modern world. So we have about 10 minutes left, and I think Bob and I were hoping that we would have a little discussion, that people would have some things to say about what we've rattled our mouths about tonight. Any, I know our hosts are monitoring the chat group, the chat room. So maybe they'll have some comments for us.
I don't see any questions yet. I did just put a call out to see if anyone wanted to drop something in the chat. Bob, I see you waving your hand. Do you have a question there? Oh, ask to unmute. Are you having trouble unmuting?
There we go. Yeah,
There you are.
I couldn't unmute there for a minute. Okay, thank you.
Sorry for that.
So I wanted to share something, if I could, about the gift, the story of the gift at the beginning of my story. There were a few comments in the chat box, and I wanted to kind of clarify the meaning of the food gift. So one of the families that I was lucky enough to be adopted into is a Cheyenne family, and my adopted dad was Moses Starr, who was a ceremonial man. And the Cheyenne have a way of looking at food in making food offerings. So there are 4 types of food that are always present at ceremony and that are part of what are always given as a gift that's brought to somebody's home. But another interesting, it's kind of an aside, but I think it's a curious one. As a Plains tribe, the highest gift that you could give somebody is a horse. And, the story is that when in more modern times now that it's hard to get a hold of a horse, when you want to give the equivalent of a horse, you take the following items and you bundle them together. You take a rifle and you take a Pendleton blanket. These are the trade blankets of that you find all over Indian country, and any denomination of money. It could be a 1, a 5, a 10, a 20, but you take those 3 things and bundle them together, and it's the modern equivalent of a horse, showing the same kind of respect. But gift giving is important because a person is not evaluated by how much they have earned, how much they've saved, how much they can parade around in front of everybody else. You're evaluated more by what you give than what you can show that you've accumulated over a lifetime.
That's so true, because, you know, people come to me and they say, oh, I want to go see a medicine man. You know, I want to go to the reservation and find a medicine man. And I'm like, well, if you go there, everyone will be silent and no one will talk to you. You know? And
That was
like,
the moral
really?
of my story, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I try and, you know, head people off at the pass and tell them how that works, you know, like, because the way that you connect with healers is to go somewhere and be present and be helpful and be patient and be honest and not ask for anything. And eventually someone will tell you who to go see for what ails you. But if you ask, it's not going to happen. And it's so hard for people from outside the culture to understand this, because in settler culture, as we'll call it, which is a new term that I've learned, it's all about advertising, and people, you know, take out full page ads and they put up signs and they say, I'm a great healer, come see me and give me lots of money. And it's sort of the opposite, you know, in not sort of, it is the opposite in indigenous cultures. You have to be humble in order to receive. And yeah, you wouldn't go to see someone without bringing them something. It just wouldn't fly, as Bob discovered, you know.
Exactly.
And
Thank you
yeah.
both. I wanted to just jump in here because we are getting some great questions from our audience. And there was a great one that Loretta just shared that we were wondering if you could comment on. And the question is, can you talk about the appropriateness of a non-native therapist sharing Indigenous stories? Do one of you want to answer to that?
Yeah, I think I could speak to that. I think I personally try to use the stories of the person's culture with whom I'm working, with their permission. And I think that is meaningful to them. So in the books that I've written about using Native Hawaiian stories when I lived in Hawaii and worked with Native Hawaiians. And I've used Maori stories when I've worked with Maori people. And so I think that it can be respectful to use the stories from somebody else's culture, because you can say to them, well, I really want to be respectful to you. So I've found some stories from your culture that I'd like to tell you, because maybe you forgot them. And they may be helpful to you for where you want to get to, for what you want to do. And so I want to offer you these stories from your culture that I found that may help you and may lead you to even more better stories from your culture. And so that's the approach that I take. And Bob, you might want to add something to that. You're muted, Bob.
There we-
You're a mutant. You're still a mutant.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
There we go. All right. What I would say is that whenever possible, that it's important to state what the source is of the story. So that's why it was important to me in telling that story that I told you about Tom Porter, because Tom is the one that told the story to me, and he knows that I will be passing the story on to somebody else. So that's the protocol that I've become aware of.
Yeah, that's an important point.
You know, that the story can be taken and now used in another place, as long as you understand what the nation is that it came from and how it came to me.
Indeed. And I should mention that the Iktomi stories that I told are stories that I've heard on the reservation, hanging out with people, and they're old stories, as old as people can remember.
Thank you both. Thank you for speaking to the importance of speaking to the origins and permission and attribution. I am popping in here because we are a few minutes from 6:15 if you're in Pacific time zone, and I know a lot of our friends here might be in Eastern time zone and beyond, including our speakers, and it's getting on into your evening. So I do really want to respect everyone's time. Thank you both, Lewis, Bob, and also to you, Barbara, for jumping in. It was so nice to have all your voices in this space. Gosh, it was such a reminder for me of just how captivating it can be to join an evening of storytelling. And, this medium can be a bit challenging, but I found you both to engage us so wholeheartedly. So thank you for that. Do you want to say a couple words about your full program in May? So if folks enjoy this evening, we are offering a 2-day workshop with Lewis and Bob in May. And any teaser you want to drop into the space of what people might expect?
More of what we just did. Mo better, mo longer. Yeah. So.
Oh, Bob,
there we go. Yeah, I think what we talked about was trying to come up with a bunch of stories. Well, you know what? Let me go back to the origin of how we put together this workshop, because I think that's relevant. I called Lewis on the phone one day and I said, Lewis, I'm working on a project and I was wondering if you have a reference book that tells you therapeutically what you can use different Native American stories for. And he thought about it for a minute and he said, I've never seen a book like that. Maybe you and I should write it. So that was the seed of the idea of Lewis and I getting together to write the book. And then we decided that a way to kind of move that project forward was to have people experience it firsthand. And that's why this is the first place that we're leading this workshop, where we're going to be talking about how you select stories therapeutically and then how you use them. So kind of two different parts of the workshop. So the whole idea is to experience this on multiple levels, but with an eye toward knowing how to utilize stories in a therapeutic way.
Indeed.
Thank you for that. We have a small group of our presenters who we've gotten to know just in the past year, and we haven't actually gotten to know in person, and you two are among those. And so we're really honored that you're offering this workshop for the first time with Hollyhock, and I hope that one day soon we can do it on the beautiful land of Cortez in person one day when we can gather safely again. I just wanted to do also a brief message and thank you to everyone in this space. Your donations and coming to our free programming is what allows us to continue to offer programming like this. So if you want to continue to support us, I'm just going to pop in here our link to donate to us as a not-for-profit. If you want to continue to support a program like this, we would really appreciate it. And thank you for all those who have already done so. We have a